it was a part of a very important campaign early in World War II, a campaign that is not remembered very well, especially in this country. And I think one reason is because it happened in late 1940 and early 1941 when we were not even in the war yet. And I guess most people in this country desperately hoped that we would never be involved in the war. So I think that's one reason why it's not remembered so well. But I do think it also is given less credit in Great Britain than it should have been given. And I think maybe the reason for that is twofold. One, the stunning victory of the British Army was immediately erased, almost immediately, because of the arrival of the Africa Corps in North Africa. The other reason, I think, is to give General Wavell the credit he deserved might detract a little bit from the heaping praise that was given to General Montgomery after the Battle of El Alamein. In fact, after the war, Churchill said, before El Alamein, we never had a victory. After El Alamein, we were never defeated. Well, I think that really does a disservice, a great disservice to his commanding general and the brave British and Dominion troops that pulled off a great victory in 1940-41 against overwhelming odds. But let's set the stage for this campaign by just stepping back to May of 1940. After the Germans invaded Poland in September of 1939, and Great Britain and France declared war on Germany, the Germans and the Russians divided up Poland. The German campaign probably lasted about 40 days. There was a good book about the Polish campaign called 1,000-Hour Day, I think. And if you divide that up into days, that's about 40 days. That's about how long it took Germany to dispose of Poland. Well, by early October 1939, there wasn't much going on. And William Shire in The Rise and Fall called it Sitzkrieg in the West because the three armies, I guess, British, French, and German, staring at each other across the lines in Germany and France, but not much was going on. The French were content to kind of sit behind their Maginot Line. The Germans had one of their own, and so there just wasn't a whole lot going for about 6 or 7 months after the disposal of Poland. Of course, the British had a great army in France, but they must have had at least 100 places around the world where they had interests that needed to be defended. You start in Egypt and just go around the world going east. There was Greece, Palestine, Iran, Iraq, there was India, Australia. So it's true that at that time the sun never set on the Union Jack, which means they had interest all around the world. So it's a small island nation. They were stretched really thin all around the world. Now they did have some good fighting troops that they called in from the Dominions, and some Australian and Indian divisions were very important in the battle we'll talk about tonight. And then in late May of 1940, three things happened. the Germans invaded, and they just marched around the Maginot Line through Belgium and the Low Countries and disposed of France in a few weeks. Chamberlain resigned, the prime minister, and Churchill was called to be the prime minister of Great Britain. And Mussolini, not one to pass up the main chance, I guess, declared war on France and Great Britain. He hadn't been in the war prior to that. I guess he didn't have a mutual aggression treaty with Germany, which required him to declare war on whoever declared war on Germany, as Germany did with Japan. When we declared war on Japan, it required Germany to declare war on us. But Mussolini had been out of the war up until about the 10th of June in 1940. And so he declared war on France and Great Britain. So what was the situation in North Africa? Egypt, a British interest, and Libya, an Italian colony, were side by side in North Africa. They had been suspiciously eyeing each other up until the time that Mussolini declared war on Great Britain. Egypt had been the British interest for a long time. I don't really know how long before the turn of the 20th century. Italy annexed Libya sometime in the first decade, I think, of the 20th century. Mussolini, who had been a firebrand socialist and anti-colonialist, nevertheless was able to adjust his interest enough to approve Italy's interest in its colony in North Africa. And so, side by side, these two European powers had interests in North Africa. So on June the 10th, 1940, Mussolini declared war. And so then it was really an uneasy relationship between these two European powers as they looked at each other across that common border. But you'll notice that on this map, there's Mussolini's wire fence. He had actually erected a wire fence all the way down the common border between Libya and Egypt. They were not only uneasily looking at each other across that border, they were actually fighting each other in East Africa to the south. Italy had, of course, conquered Ethiopia earlier, and they had invaded British Somaliland, which was in the south, and so they were actually in actual combat in the south. So throughout the summer and fall of 1940, after Mussolini's declaration of war, they fought skirmishes on both sides of the border. Unfortunately for the Italians, Marshal Balbo, who was the commander-in-chief of the Italian forces in Libya, was shot down by his own airplanes and killed. And that brought to power as the commander-in-chief Marshal Graziani, I don't know how you pronounce it exactly, but he became the commander-in-chief.